The phone buzzed at 8:45 in the morning. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping my coffee and watching my daughter Maya pour cereal into her bowl. Outside, the typical gray Seattle rain was drumming against the window pane, casting a quiet shadow over the room. My wife Evelyn was busy packing school lunches, and my son Toby was frantically searching for his soccer cleats under the couch. In the middle of this normal family morning, my phone was having a complete meltdown. I looked at the screen. 21 missed calls, 14 voicemails, and 42 text messages, all from Donald Bradley, my director of engineering at Apex FinTech. Exactly 16 hours earlier, Donald had looked me in the eye and told me that the company was slashing my project completion bonus to zero. I took another slow sip of my coffee, letting the phone ring one more time before sliding it to silent. Let them wait. My name is Julian Vance. I am 48 years old, and until yesterday afternoon, I was the senior software architect at Apex FinTech, one of the fastest-growing financial technology companies in Seattle. For the past 7 years, I had poured my life into this company. I was the guy they called when database servers crashed at 3 in the morning, the one who spent entire weekends rewriting messy code left behind by outsourced development teams, and the architect who designed their entire security database structure from the ground up. In the early days, we were a small team, and the company executives always preached that we were a close family. They used free snacks, a ping-pong table in the lobby, and casual Friday events to build a culture of dedication. But as the company grew and the revenues began to soar, that family atmosphere quickly vanished, replaced by cold corporate metrics and empty promises. 6 months ago, Apex FinTech landed the Atlas contract. It was a massive project worth $10,600,000 to build a secure mobile banking platform from scratch for a major regional bank. It was the kind of project that could elevate our company from a mid-tier startup to a major player in the financial tech space. It was also a project that fell entirely on my shoulders. I designed the database structure, mapped out the security protocols, and built the application programming interface infrastructure from the ground up. During those 6 months, 70-hour work weeks became my normal routine. I put Maya and Toby to bed over video calls more times than I could count, watching them fall asleep through a small screen. Evelyn basically became a single parent, managing school pickups, soccer practices, homework, and bedtime stories while I sat hunched over my laptop debugging database queries until 2 in the morning in a dark room. Evelyn had warned me repeatedly. She would find me asleep at the kitchen table, with my face pressed against the keyboard, the screen casting a cold blue glow over my tired eyes. She would rub my shoulders and tell me that I was going to burn out, that no job was worth my health, or missing out on our children's lives. I always gave her the same answer. I told her it was just a few more months. I promised her that once we launched, once the contract completion bonus came through, it would all be worth it. That bonus was written directly into my contract. It was set at 18% of my annual salary for successful project delivery. For me, that meant a lump sum of just over $128,000. To our family, that was life-changing money. It was the money that could finally wipe out the heavy credit card debt we had accumulated when Toby needed emergency surgery 3 years ago. It was the fund to rebuild the savings account we had completely drained, and maybe, just maybe, it would allow us to book the family vacation to Hawaii we had been promising the kids for years. I had earned every single cent of it. The system I built was elegant, highly scalable, and bulletproof. I had implemented advanced encryption protocols that made our banking app more secure than platforms used by companies 5 times our size. The deployment was scheduled for midnight on Tuesday. We chose that time because it was the lowest traffic period, giving us a window to fix any issues before the morning rush. But 3 days before the launch, my world was thrown off balance. I was in the break room making coffee when I overheard 2 associates from the finance department talking near the window. They did not notice me standing behind the partition. One of them asked if the other had heard about the executive policy change. The other replied that they were eliminating project bonuses for all salaried employees, meaning only commission-based sales staff would receive them. My hand froze mid-stir. The first associate wondered about employees who had specific bonus clauses written into their contracts. The response sent a chill down my spine. The finance worker said the legal team had found a way to override existing agreements using a clause that allowed compensation adjustments at the company's discretion. I left my coffee untouched, walked back to my desk, and opened my employment agreement. There it was, buried deep in the fine print of Section 12, subsection C. The company reserved the right to modify compensation structures with appropriate notice as business needs required. Appropriate notice was a vague term that could mean anything to a corporate lawyer. I stared at the screen, a sense of dread settling in my chest as I realized the company was planning to steal my hard-earned reward. I spent the rest of Monday in a state of quiet panic, constantly checking my inbox for an official announcement. Nothing arrived. By Tuesday morning, the silence was deafening. I knew I had to address it directly before the midnight launch. At 10 in the morning, I walked down the long carpeted hallway and knocked on Donald Bradley's office door. He looked up from his laptop, gesturing for me to enter his office, which was decorated with various manager awards and expensive modern art. I closed the door behind me and asked him directly if the rumors about eliminating the project completion bonuses were true. I watched his expression shift, a subtle tightening around his eyes, and a nervous adjustment of his collar that confirmed my worst fears before he even spoke. Donald leaned back in his expensive leather chair and told me that he could not discuss policy decisions that had not been officially announced. I pointed out that he was not denying it. He sighed, telling me that even if there were compensation adjustments being discussed at the executive level, I needed to focus on the launch. He said the Atlas deployment was happening in less than 30 hours, and that was all that mattered. I left his office with a tight knot in my stomach. The evasion was a clear confirmation. The company was going to take my work and pocket my bonus. I went through the rest of the day on autopilot, attending status meetings and answering developer questions, but my mind was running calculations. If they took that money, we would remain trapped under the weight of Toby's medical bills. We would have to tell Maya she could not attend her summer camp, and the family vacation would remain a distant dream. Later that afternoon, around 3 p.m., Donald called me back into his office. He had a smug smile on his face as he told me what a phenomenal job I had done on the Atlas platform. He said the client was thrilled, and we were fully prepared for the midnight deployment. Then he cleared his throat, opened a folder, and slid a piece of paper across the desk. He said the executive team had completed their review of the compensation framework, and they were adjusting the bonus structure. I asked him what he meant by adjusting. Donald looked at me calmly and said they were officially eliminating project completion bonuses for all salaried staff. The words felt like a physical blow. He explained that my salary already compensated me for delivering projects, and the bonus was creating an unfair disparity between departments. I looked at the document on his desk. It was an amendment to my contract, a rider that legally stripped away my 18% completion bonus. I told him that the bonus was in my original signed agreement and that I had worked myself to the point of exhaustion for 6 months to earn it. Donald remained cold and unmoved, telling me that the company was within its legal rights because of the 30-day modification clause. He told me to sign the rider so we could focus on the launch. When I asked what would happen if I refused, his tone became threatening. He said the company would have to reconsider whether I was the right cultural fit for their future. It was a blatant ultimatum: sign away my $128,000 or be fired. I looked at the clock on his wall. It was exactly 3:45 p.m. Something inside me snapped. Not with anger, but with absolute clarity. I told Donald that I needed to take some personal time. He scoffed, pointing out that the biggest deployment in company history was happening at midnight. I replied that I had 112 hours of saved paid time off, and I was using it immediately. I stood up, left the unsigned rider on his desk, walked past my developers, packed my laptop, and walked out of the building. Outside, the cool Seattle air smelled of rain and salt from the Puget Sound, carrying a crisp reminder of the world beyond our office walls. I walked to my car, feeling a sudden, immense weight lifting from my shoulders. When I arrived home, Evelyn knew something was wrong the moment she saw my face. She immediately called her sister to watch the kids for the evening. We sat in the living room, and I told her everything Donald had said. I told her how they had stolen 6 months of my life and expected me to smile and thank them for it. Evelyn did not hesitate. She told me she stood by me, no matter what. She said we would figure out the finances, but I could not let them walk all over me. Her support gave me the strength I needed. The midnight deployment was hours away. I was the only senior architect on the project. More importantly, I was the only person who possessed the master administrator credentials for the entire cloud infrastructure. The rest of the team knew how to write their individual features, but I was the only one who understood how the entire ecosystem connected and how the security fail-safes operated. I turned off my phone, sat down for dinner with my family, and went to bed early, leaving the corporate world behind for the night. While I slept soundly, the deployment began at midnight. As I later learned from my colleagues, the team managed to push the code live. For the first 45 minutes, the application appeared to run smoothly. Users began downloading the banking app, logging in, and setting up their accounts. But what Donald and the executive team did not understand was the security architecture I had designed to protect the bank's data. To comply with federal financial regulations and prevent unauthorized server takeovers, I had built an automated credential verification fail-safe. Every 6 hours, the core administrative servers required an encrypted authentication token from the master administrator account, which was tied exclusively to my personal hardware security key. If the system did not receive this secure confirmation within a 2-minute window, it would automatically trigger a defensive lockdown sequence. This was a standard practice under the Federal Security Guidelines for Critical Database Structures. The security protocol utilized advanced public key cryptography. The system was designed so that the private key remained inside a secure hardware security module, and the automated verification agent on our cloud platform required a signed cryptographic challenge for my specific key file. Without this challenge being completed, the automated agent assumed a hostile security breach was occurring. It would systematically disable all database connection pools, revoke access tokens, and isolate the primary servers from the public web. At 12:47 a.m., the system sent the automated authentication request. When my credentials did not respond because I was offline and my key was disconnected, the failsafe functioned exactly as it was designed to do. The application did not crash or display a broken screen, which would have allowed junior engineers to easily identify the issue. Instead, it entered an administrative safe mode. To the users, the interface looked perfectly normal, but all transaction databases were frozen. People could open the app, but they were locked out of their accounts. If they tried to transfer funds or check their balances, the screen would spin indefinitely before showing a generic error message instructing them to try again later. It was a silent, frustrating halt that ground their operations to a complete standstill. By 1 in the morning, the support lines were flooded with complaints from early users. The customer support director ran onto the engineering floor, frantically shouting that they were receiving hundreds of calls every minute. The developers stared blankly at their monitoring dashboards, unable to find any syntax errors in the logs. By 2, the monitoring dashboards were flashing bright red, signaling systemic failures across all microservices. Donald and the engineering leads tried to access the administrative panel to bypass the security block, but they found themselves completely locked out of the virtual servers. The documentation for the manual override sequence did not exist in the shared repository because I had planned to upload it only after the launch was completed, and my bonus was paid. The only copy of that sequence was stored securely on my local drive, which remained shut down in my backpack at home. When I woke up on Wednesday morning, the sun was shining through the kitchen window. I made blueberry pancakes for Maya and Toby, enjoying the quiet morning without the usual rush of checking work emails and answering Slack alerts. I spent time listening to Maya talk about her art project and helping Toby pack his gear for his upcoming soccer game. After the kids left for school, I sat down with a fresh cup of coffee and turned my phone back on. The device began to shake violently in my hand as notifications flooded the screen. There were 21 missed calls, 14 voicemails, and 42 text messages. The messages from Donald Bradley showed a clear trajectory of panic. The first few, sent around midnight, were casual attempts to find me, asking if I was logging in. By 2 in the morning, the texts were demanding my immediate presence, written in harsh language. By 5, the tone had shifted to absolute desperation, with Donald pleading for the administrator credentials and warning that the company's reputation was on the line. One text read that they were losing $93,000 in dollars for every hour the system remained down, and that the chief executive officer was demanding answers. In another message sent at 6 in the morning, Donald pleaded with me, promising we would find a way to make things right if I would only send him the master configuration password. I listened to his voicemails in order. In the background of the later recordings, I could hear the absolute chaos of the office, with phones ringing constantly, developers arguing, and managers shouting about angry clients. I took a slow, satisfying sip of my coffee, feeling a sense of calm validation. They had believed I was just an expense, a resource they could easily manipulate and intimidate. They had forgotten that the entire multi-million-dollar system they were selling was held together by the code I had written. I dialed Donald's number. He answered on the first ring, his voice cracking with exhaustion and panic. He demanded to know where I was and accused me of intentionally sabotaging the launch. I reminded him calmly that I was on approved paid time off and that any technical issues should be handled by the on-call engineering team. He screamed that the system was locked, that they were losing $93,000 every hour, and that the board was preparing to fire him. I told him that sounded like a management problem and hung up the phone. 5 minutes after I hung up on Donald, my phone rang again. This time, the caller identification displayed the direct office line of Alistair Heward, the chief executive officer of Apex FinTech. I answered, keeping my tone professional. Alistair was a man accustomed to authority, and he attempted to use a commanding tone. He told me that Donald had informed him of the situation, and he wanted to resolve the misunderstanding regarding my bonus. I corrected him immediately, stating there was no misunderstanding. Donald had handed me a contract amendment that stripped away my 18% bonus and had threatened to terminate my employment when I refused to sign it. Alistair sighed, suggesting that my decision to walk out and let the application freeze could be viewed as holding the company hostage, which might carry legal consequences under federal computer fraud laws. I had anticipated this threat and was prepared. I told him that I was simply utilizing my legally accrued paid time off, which had been submitted and approved through the company database system. The system lockdown was not a malicious action, but rather an automated security fail-safe designed to comply with federal cybersecurity standards for financial institutions. If the company chose to deploy a banking platform without the lead architect present to manage the master keys, that was an operational failure on their part, not sabotage. I advised him to speak with his legal team before making any empty accusations, as my lawyer was already on standby. Alistair threatened to have his engineering team bypass my security block. I chuckled quietly and told him that the platform was built using the advanced encryption standard with a 256-bit key. I explained that if he wanted to brute force the cryptographic validation, his servers would need to run calculations for several billion years. I knew his database directors had already told him this, which was why he was calling me instead of overriding the system. Alistair was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, the corporate bluster was gone, replaced by a quiet, calculating tone. He asked me what it would take to get the master credentials and restore the system. I laid out my terms clearly. I demanded my original contractually guaranteed 18% completion bonus, which amounted to $128,000. I also demanded a 25% increase in my annual base salary and a legally binding clause protecting me from any form of retaliation or termination related to this event. Finally, I required a severance package equal to 24 months of my salary in the event that the company terminated my employment for any reason in the next 2 years. Alistair protested, claiming that drafting and signing such an agreement would take days, and they did not have that kind of time. He tried to offer me a smaller under-the-table retention payment, but I refused immediately, stating I would only accept a formal contract signed by the executive board. The Atlas contract had a strict service-level agreement that allowed the client to terminate the deal if the system remained offline for more than 16 hours. They were already at 14 hours of downtime, and the financial penalties were mounting. I told him that he had exactly 3 hours to send a signed and notarized agreement to my personal email, or the application would remain locked. I hung up before he could argue. I immediately called my close friend, Clara Finch, who was an experienced employment attorney in Seattle. I explained the situation to her and told her to expect a document from Apex FinTech. Clara laughed, calling me incredibly bold, but she agreed to stand by to review the contract the moment it arrived. She noted that under the Washington Wage Payment Act, attempting to modify an active employment contract under threat of termination could be argued as economic duress, which would make the rider voidable. Furthermore, she confirmed that under Washington non-compete laws, trying to restrict my future employment after forcing a contract change would be entirely illegal. She confirmed that since my paid time off was officially approved, I had no legal obligation to perform work duties during my leave. If they attempted to sue, she was prepared to file a massive countersuit for wage theft, which would carry double damages and mandatory attorney fees under state law. For the next 2 hours, I sat on my porch, enjoying the quiet breeze and talking with Evelyn. For the first time in years, I did not feel the constant anxiety of deadlines and corporate pressure. I knew my value, and I knew they had no choice but to meet my terms. At 11:43 in the morning, the email from Alistair's office arrived, containing the draft agreement. I forwarded it to Clara immediately. She called me back 20 minutes later, confirming that the contract was airtight. The legal team had included all my demands, including the salary increase, the severance package, and a mutual non-disparagement clause that prevented them from damaging my professional reputation. I signed the document electronically and returned it, then sent Donald the master credential override codes. The system was successfully unlocked at 1:37 p.m. on Wednesday, after a total downtime of 18 hours and 22 minutes. The incident had cost Apex FinTech approximately $1,600,000 in lost transactions and client compensation, and their stock price dropped by 11% over the next week. But my contract was signed, notarized, and legally binding. When I returned to the office on Monday, the atmosphere was quiet. Many of my fellow engineers gave me subtle nods of approval, while the management team avoided my gaze. The engineering floor was normally a loud and chaotic place, but that morning you could hear a pin drop. The other developers looked at me as if I were a folk hero, the man who had actually stood up to the corporate machine and won. Donald Bradley was furious, but he was powerless to act against me. Under the terms of my new agreement, any attempt to discipline or terminate me would trigger the massive 24-month severance payout, which the company could not afford. 3 months later, Alistair Heward called me into his office. He told me that the incident had exposed a critical flaw in their leadership structure. He admitted that Donald's attempt to steal my bonus had almost destroyed the company's most important client relationship. He announced that they were restructuring the engineering department and offered me the position of vice president of engineering with a salary that was double what I had been making 6 months prior. I accepted the promotion, but only after negotiating strict terms regarding work-life balance, remote work options, and the hiring of an assistant vice president to ensure there was never a single point of failure in our systems again. I explained to Alistair that single points of failure do not happen because of technical design errors. They happen because greedy managers try to underpay and squeeze the key engineers, driving away talent until only one person is left holding the security keys. I argued that by paying engineers their fair market value and respecting their boundaries, we would build a much more stable and successful company. Alistair listened quietly and nodded, acknowledging that the board had come to the same realization. Donald Bradley resigned shortly after my promotion, Realizing that he no longer had any authority over the department and that his career at Apex FinTech was effectively over, I promoted Iris Caldwell, a brilliant developer who had supported me during the crisis, to take his place as Director of Engineering. Together, Iris and I completely changed the culture of the engineering division. We ensured that all employment contracts guaranteed project bonuses, and we ended the practice of expecting employees to work unpaid overtime. We established a collaborative environment where every technical contributor was valued and respected, rather than being treated as disposable resources. Today, my life is completely different. I make it to Toby's soccer games and Maya's school plays. I have dinner with Evelyn every night, and we finally took that trip to Hawaii, paid for entirely by the bonus I fought to keep. The vacation was wonderful, spent walking along the sandy beaches and watching the sunset with my family, far away from the glowing screens and chaotic servers of my former life. I no longer feel the heavy weight of work hanging over my weekends or creeping into my sleep. When I speak at technology conferences now, I tell young developers my story. I tell them that corporate entities will always try to minimize the cost of labor while maximizing profits. I tell them that your skills have real value and that you must build leverage to protect that value. Sometimes, standing up for yourself means walking out the door at 3:45 p.m. and letting their system crash. It is not sabotage. It is simply showing them the true cost of your absence. I showed them, and I would do it again without hesitation. I learned that respect in the corporate world is not something you earn by being compliant and quiet. It is something you demand by knowing your worth and holding the line when they try to cross it. Our skills are the foundation of their digital empires, and it is time we started acting like it. At home, my children are learning these lessons too. Maya recently negotiated a fair distribution of work for her group project, and Toby presented me with a detailed spreadsheet of his household chores to argue for an increase in his allowance. I smiled, realizing that I am raising independent thinkers who will never let themselves be exploited. That realization is worth more than any bonus check, and it is the legacy I am proudest to leave behind. In the end, standing up for myself did not just save my career. It built a better future for my family and established a standard of respect that will protect my fellow developers for years to come. Corporate loyalty is a myth manufactured to exploit your dedication. True professional security only comes when you know your worth and have the courage to enforce it. The system only works if you let it, and I refuse to let it exploit me any longer.